But Norfolk Island has a dark past, and it's known as the most haunted island on Earth. By night, it's forbidding, forsaken. The ruins of an outpost that was devoid of humanity, devoid of hope. Ruins which are haunted by the ghosts of the damned.
It would have been the most brutal place on Earth. I remember when I was young that it was compared to the concentration camps, Belsen, and the horrors here that went on.
A century and a half ago, Norfolk Island was one of Britain's most notorious penal colonies, a dumping ground for the most vicious, most violent criminals. A jail where the savagery of the inmates was more than matched by the ferocity of their keepers.
It would be called a blood-soaked island because of the blood that was let from lashings. People got sometimes 200 or 300, 400 strokes of the lash, cat o' nine tails. Sometimes their backs, the skin was flayed off their backs so that the bones were showing. And there were also so many murders. Quite often a convict would just up and kill the next fellow to him for no reason at all.
Within the first 2 weeks, they had something like 11 hangings. Their punishment was such that, that they were committing ridiculous crimes just to get the death penalty. I mean, they were treated like animals.
Norfolk Island was discovered by the English explorer Captain James Cook in 1774. Its isolation, deep in the South Pacific, midway between Noumea and New Zealand, made it the ideal site for a penal colony. And by the mid-1880s, almost 2,000 convicts were condemned to this hell on earth. Wander through Norfolk Graveyard today, and you can read its turbulent history etched in stone. Hardship, shoulder to shoulder with heroism. And in one section, names from the past: Christian, Quintal, Buffett. Names that hark back to the mutiny on the Bounty. That's because descendants of the mutineers, part Polynesian, part European, settled on Norfolk in 1856. They're known as the Pitcairners, and with their arrival, Norfolk's ghostly reputation was born.
The island would be a totally ghost-saturated island. I would say probably at least 50% of the people who live here have heard of or have seen or felt some strange phenomenon. It's very hard to explain, but once you've seen it, you never forget. That is for sure.
Nan Smith has lived here 50 years. It's a house with a century of history and hauntings. Hauntings that Nan has experienced firsthand.
I realised that it was a ghost. I couldn't believe my eyes because I never believed in any such thing before.
That first shock was back in 1948, when Nan Smith was a teenager. She was asleep. It was around midnight. Not a light, not a sound, but something woke her. As Nan opened her eyes, there before her was a young woman. A woman in a long white dress. Her blonde hair parted in the middle. And her eyes. Her eyes are what Nan remembers most vividly.
She looked desperately sad. She gave off a sort of an aura that made you feel very sad. I was so frightened or so terrified I couldn't move, I couldn't even call out. I remember just sort of staring at her for as long as I could until I had to blink, and then she just gradually faded away.
Over the years, the young woman has reappeared many times, never moving, never saying a word, just there, surrounded by an aura of tragedy. She's always seemed benevolent, but the same cannot be said of another inhabitant of the Smith household, an evil influence in the second bedroom.
Emanating from that corner, there seemed to be a great force like a blast, and it blew the door into the hall closed with a great bang. I couldn't understand what caused it, but it was there and it was horrifying. It's one of the nastiest things I've ever felt.